Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion focuses on server groups, a component of Configuration Manager current branch, how it works, what it is, and so on. Here's the agenda. So what are server groups? Why use server groups? A little bit of concepts and terminology we need to understand as we talk about server groups, the requirements for server groups, how server groups actually work, do a little bit of demo, including some deep dive, and then end up with some tips and tricks. Really, let me shift over. What are server groups? So this was a feature that was introduced as a pre-release feature in Configuration Manager Current Branch 1606. And haven't really talked about it right now. As of this recording being made, we're on Configuration Manager Current Branch 1710. Haven't talked about server groups until now because I typically wait until features are out of pre-release status to talk about them, but definitely want to share information about server groups. It's a really cool capability that can help in some unique scenarios. And this is also an opportunity to talk about the very idea of pre-release features. So pre-release features are kind of carry with them maybe a bad rap by admins around the industry. They are many times shied away from because the idea is, hey, we don't want to use a feature in production that is not fully supported, and totally understand that. Except pre-release features are fully supported. Features would not be released as a part of a production build of Config Manager unless they were fully supported. And pre-release features, same thing. We actually didn't help ourselves greatly whenever we first released pre-release features because the verbiage that went along with them often left the distinct impression that they were not fully production supported. If you go check now, you will find that that verbiage has, in every case I've seen, been updated to clearly state, yes, these are production supported and feel free to use them. The only real thing that's different about these is pre-release features are those that are still slated for additional, maybe more rapid development than other features. But not having the ability to use pre-release features, at least for testing, if not production use, really does kind of limit you to some of the cool new things that are out there. So beyond server groups, what else is pre-release? Well, that would be the Cloud Management Gateway, at least as of this recording, still pre-release. Another one is scripts that was introduced, still pre-release. Both of those bring really powerful capabilities that I think every environment should have available to them. But anyway, so I just wanted to spend some time there. So yeah, this was introduced pre-release. It is still pre-release. Don't know when it's going to move out of pre-release. The fact that it isn't pre-release still just tells me that there's still work planned here. But again, fully production supported. So server groups, again, what are they? Beyond being in pre-release, really designed to handle some complex software update scenarios. So what do I mean? So server groups were designed to support environments where there's some additional challenges applying software updates. So the mind immediately goes to, especially with the name server groups, immediately goes to the idea of clusters, perhaps. Or maybe another example would be SharePoint farms that require some special treatment, or Skype, maybe, or Exchange, maybe, right? Or add your own piece in as well, right? So that's certainly true, and certainly server groups were designed with those pieces in mind. But the name server groups also kind of implies, hey, this is something that just works for servers. And that is absolutely not true, right? So knowing that this can work also with workstations offers even more potential useful scenarios that can work with this. And so, for example, just to call out a couple, think of maybe a call center where you need to treat the systems in a call center in a unique way so that not all of them are being updated at the same time and so on. Or maybe a medical scenario where you have to make sure that you have a certain number of systems of a certain type available and only update a certain portion of them, right? And there's many other examples you could probably throw in here. So another question that sometimes comes up is what are server groups used to manage? So the answer is traditional config manager software update deployments. So another way to ask that, do server groups work with any other type of deployment other than software update deployments? And the answer to that is clearly no. The plumbing is only wired into software updates. You can actually see a bit of a kind of a fast forward to where we're going. If you go look at the updates deployment log, you will see all the details of server group function, if you will, in the updates deployment log, right? Now, I'm going to put an asterisk here because, again, traditional configuration manager software update deployment, absolutely, right? You can use this alongside your config manager software update deployment method. Also, once you have this configured, there's really no reason to change the way that you deploy your software updates. You'll let the server group configuration handle those that are part of a server group, and then normal processes happen elsewhere. But I'm still going to put an asterisk here around software update deployment. It is true, and you'll hear me say a couple of times probably, that server groups only work with software update deployments. But there's an asterisk there, and we'll cover the asterisk here near to the end of the session. So why do we use server groups? Why do we care? Well, already covered the complex software update scenarios, definitely true. Flexible configuration, so you have really complete choice over how you want to manage systems that are part of the server group, right? So there's 3 different scenarios. You'll see this in the demo here in a minute, but there's 3 different scenarios that you can set up as you think through your server group. So say there's 100 systems in this server group, right? You can set the server group to say, okay, only 10% of the systems in this server group can be updated concurrently. So we would do 10 systems. The 11th system that would come in would be denied for a short period of time, and then ultimately would be able to proceed from there, right? Or you can specify the number of systems in a server group that can update concurrently, right? Any number you want. So if you have that same 100, you can say 5 at a time can update simultaneously, right? And so we'll do that. The third is to be able to define the specific order of operations for updating systems, devices in a server group, right? Here, we're kind of going one right after the other, and so there's really not a concurrency thing here so much, but it is an option if that's something you want to do, right? Okay, so easy implementation. Right, very simple to do. Again, you're not really changing your software update process. You're just changing how those updates are processed on certain systems. So it fits right into what you do today. Expanded scope. So again, many organizations have groups of systems where they have to kind of be tended to manually or with an external process because they're sensitive. Right. Well, now you don't need to have a separate process for those. In a lot of cases I've seen, whenever systems are kind of kept out of the normal processing loop, certainly for software updates, then they can tend to become outdated. And that's a problem, for sure, to have systems that are not up to date with the latest patches and so on, right? All right, and the funny thing is, these systems often are viewed as some of the most mission critical systems in the business, yet sometimes they are the ones that are treated with the least consistency, right? So having the ability to use server groups, control the environment for that software update experience will allow those systems to come into the normal fold of updating and also increase the value of what you're delivering from Config Manager. And then this is a familiar tool set. Like I said, go right in, use the same process, is good to go, right? And fully automated. So once you get it set up, it just works, okay? So as we start to turn toward seeing this actually work, a couple of concepts, terminology things that we kind of need to understand. The first is the idea of the scripts piece of this. So I'll show this to you all in a minute. As you configure server groups, one of the options is to use scripts. The first script would be what's called the node drain script, and the other one is called the node resume script. And the idea of these scripts is that if there's any special kind of activity you need to perform, on these systems prior to updating them in the software update, the script can be designed to do that. So in the SharePoint world, for example, there may be SharePoint farms where certain systems need to be processed in a certain order of operations to get them ready for patching, and then a reboot that follows or whatever, right? A node drain script would work very well for that. Skype systems, where you need to really make sure you understand what's happening in the environment and the order of operations and so on. Node drain, node resume scripts are designed for that, right? There's also a locking concept. Really, you might not even really need to understand this unless you're looking at the logs or kind of monitoring how things work. But in order to make this server group function work, to only allow certain numbers of systems to be updated at a time, right? Then other systems have to be excluded from updating until they receive a signal that it's okay to proceed, right? So think of it this way: if you have that same group of 100 systems and 10% of them can update at the same time, when you get 10 of them into the process of updating, the 11th one that comes in and asks, hey, can I update now? Again, you'll see this all in a minute. Can I update now? The answer is going to come back from the site to say, no, you have to wait. Well, once one of the first 10 finish updating, that will free up a, quote, lock. And that 11th system can now go ahead and proceed with the update, right? Make a lot more sense to you whenever you see it work here in a minute. What are the requirements for server groups? And I list out none here. That is really true because many components, for example, will require additional software to be added, additional site system roles to be in place, additional installation of something, right? That's not true for server groups. Server groups totally work with what you have built in today. You may not have configured them yet, but the ability to configure them is right there in the product. With, again, maybe you should have put this in, they are pre-release features. So you do have to enable the ability to use pre-release features and then turn this feature on and then restart the console to have it show up, right? But there's nothing else to install per se. All right. So let's move ahead. So kind of how does this work? How do server groups work? So this is a diagram I put together trying to illustrate how server groups work. Pretty simple diagram, but pretty simple process at the same time to conceptualize anyway. So on the left-hand side, you have a group of servers. On the right-hand side, you have a group of client systems, workstations, right? Maybe call center, medical devices. On the server side, clusters, SharePoint, Exchange, whatever, right? So the way this works is you're going to enable a system to be a part of a server group. That fact is going to be communicated down to the client through policy. It's going to know that it is now part of a server group, right? Once it's part of the server group, and again, the 1, 2, and 4 steps are the same for servers and clients. Once it's part of a server group, the client's going to know, hey, I've got an update now at some point. It's going to try to install that update. And before it's able to proceed with the install of the update, it's going to request a lock be configured or check to see if there's a lock available for it to proceed with the update. The way that works is it's going to go communicate to the management point. Management point's going to run a query against the site database, determine if the lock is available, check the priority if that's applicable depending on how server groups are configured, and then return an answer back to that client. The client's either going to, step 4, receive a lock priority status that is positive and proceed to update, or it's going to wait until a lock becomes available or its priority gets in line to go ahead and proceed. Right? High level, how this works. So now let's kind of talk about setting this up. How do we go about setting it up? And again, it's really, really easy to set up. Let me pull in the ConfigMgr lab, ConfigMgr site server, I should say. Log into it, and we're going to go ahead and just take a look at the collections. Take a second for this to come up. There we go. All right, so we're going to launch the console. Cool. That. Sorry, I should have had this up and waiting for us. All right, here comes the console. Good. All right, so now that I'm here, I'm going to go into my device collections. I have a collection created already that is configured to be a server group. So I'm going to go to properties on that. You'll see right away the settings here. The setting here, all devices are part of the same server group that are in this collection. I go to settings and there's the three choices that I talked about. Allow a certain percentage of the machines in this server group to be updated at the same time. Allow a certain number. In my case, I've chosen 1. That's important because I only have 2 demo machines that I'm going to use. So I only want to allow one of them to update at the same time. You'll see that in a minute. Or I have the option to specify the order of operations. My collection here only contains 2 systems, these Windows 7 machines. And so I could specify the order I want if I wanted to. But for the demo, I'm going to use the second option. The scripts, node drain, node resume, everything above this line is required. You have to choose at least one of these. Everything below this line, the scripts, are completely optional. You do not have to configure a script. Oftentimes you will, certainly for servers of certain types you will want to, but it's not required, right? There are scenarios, think of the call center scenario, where just simply being able to control what percentage of systems are updating at the same time might be important, right? You don't need a script maybe in those scenarios because the target systems are workstations. They just operate normally, right? Maybe. So that would be an example where you don't need the scripts. In this case, I have a couple of do-nothing scripts just to illustrate. This is going to create a file called start.txt, and then this one will create a file when it's done called end.txt, and you'll see it work. And then the script timeout that we can configure right there. So I've got that configured. I'll go ahead and hit OK. By the fact I have this configured, the clients, the systems, if you will, that are part of this collection will know they are members of this particular group of systems, right, server group, and be configured with policy accordingly, right? So once you have it configured, the result of configuration is, again, we're going to send that down to the client. They'll get it on their next policy cycle. The server group settings, said it already, I'll probably say it again, only impact software update deployments. They don't impact anything else, right? Again, how do we know that? Because the way you see this operating, as you'll see in a minute, is through the updates deployment log. That is a very software update specific component, right? So how do we know that this is a server group? Obviously by name, in my case, I can go into properties, as you saw, and see that it is configured to be defining a server group. But maybe I'm doing some remote support, right? And I want to be able to identify which collections are configured as server groups. Well, one way I can do that is through WMI. So my preferred tool these days for going to WMI is WMI Explorer, but this one is actually easier for looking at this, navigating to it. At least it is to me. So I'm going to go to my site, connect, enum classes, recursive. Okay, what I'm looking for is the SMS_collections. I don't want the individual collection definition. I want the overall meaning I don't want the individual collection membership. I want the collection definition. So I'm going to go to the collection here instead of the individual collection. I'm going to show instances, and I want collection ID 16. How do I know that? Because on my collection, I can see by going to properties, ID 16, right? So I'll go back to WMI, I'll double click on this, look at show moth, and this will show you all of the details about that collection as it's defined. At the bottom, you will see a new attribute called use cluster, and that is set to true, indicating that this is a server group. The use cluster tag set to true means that this is configured as a server group, this collection, right? Another reason this is maybe interesting to know is if you're ever trying to do anything programmatic against the config manager environment, and maybe it's server group specific, or you just want to know, what collections are set to be server groups and so on, which is different than a normal collection, you can query it, right, and figure it out through code, through WMI, whatever you like. All right. On the client side, definitely some changes, right? There will be an indication in WMI that this client is part of a server group. It will act accordingly. I haven't found that in WMI yet, so I know it's there somewhere. I will find it eventually, but before this recording, I didn't find it. The updates deployment log is another really good indication that it's working, that the client's working according to server group being defined, right? So I'm not going to show you the client stuff here. I'm going to show that to you in the next demo, right? So since I didn't see it in WMI yet. All right, so quickly pull out the config manager site server. Now talking about, after we've got it configured, how do we work with server groups, right? So kind of setting this up, I was thinking through different scenarios that we might need to factor in for server groups, and wondering if server groups would work in those states. Well, you can see the table on the screen. You already know what the answer is to these. The most common deployment of software updates where server groups could be involved would be where you have a required software update and you have a scheduled install time for that, a requirement to install at a certain time. And so the question is, do we support server groups in that scenario? Absolutely. If we didn't support it there, then it wouldn't be useful at all, right? But thinking through the demos I was setting up for this, and what I'm going to do in a minute, I thought, well, if we only support server group functionality for a scheduled install at that scheduled install time, it's going to become interesting to set up the demo, right? Because I'll have to time that out really well. So I wanted to see if we have a required software update and we manually initiate the install from Software Center, will that also trigger server groups? And the answer is absolutely, right? It works exactly the same. The next one in line, if I do an optional software update and then manually install it, which is what I'm doing in my lab for the demo, does that work with server groups? Absolutely. Same mechanism, right? So it all of a sudden made the demo environment easier, and so on. And then mentioned this a couple of times already. I already knew that it would not work most likely outside of software updates for a lot of different reasons, but I went ahead and tested it anyway. Will this work for a non-software update type of a deployment? Not at all, right? It just doesn't work that way. The mechanism is strictly a software updates mechanism, right? Okay, so let's actually see this thing work. And the way that I'm going to set this up, let me pull back in the site server for just a minute. So the way I have this configured in my software library, I have my software update group, and this is my software update group that I want to deploy. I'll show members. And so from here, you'll see a couple of things. I've got a couple of Windows 7 updates deployed, and I've got an Office 365 update deployed. That will put an asterisk around and come back to that in a minute. Let me pull in the clients that I'm going to use for testing real quick. Again, I have a couple of Windows 7 machines. Pull this one in. I'm going to log in it real quick. All right. Then I have another Windows 7 machine right here that I will log into. They don't both fit on the screen very well, but we'll make it work. Log into this one. All right. And okay, cool. So this one went ahead and came up pretty quick. I'm going to change position just because I want number 1 on the left. Didn't have to do it that way, but hey, it works out, so I did it. Okay, good. Now, on number 1, I'm going to go ahead and open up Software Center. Let's go here, Software Center. All right, it's opening. Over here, we'll open Software Center. Good. There. Now, if I go to updates, you'll see that I have 2 updates actually ready for this. I have the Windows 7 update, Office 365. Again, asterisks on that one. We'll come back to it. And go ahead and click on the update for Windows 7. in Software Center over here, I also have that update for Windows 7, so I'll click on it. And then what's going to happen whenever I install this, it's going to write those text files into the temporary folder, right? So let me go ahead into temp. I'm going to shrink this down and make it where we can kind of watch things simultaneously. There we go. Move this over to the right a little bit, just get it positioned well. Same thing on the system. Going to go ahead and go into the computer, temp, and shrink this down. Move this over. All right, and we are ready to install. So what I'm going to do is select install on these as close to the same time as I can humanly do it, right? And as soon as I hit install, what we should be watching for on these boxes is an indication that the node drain script ran, which will be a start.txt, and then an indication after a bit that the node the node resume script is run, which will be an end.txt. Now, I'll tell you before I start this that it probably will take several minutes at least for the update to install on whichever system installs it first. So I will pause the video once the install is in progress and then come back to it once the install is finished and the end.txt comes in, just to not make you sit and wait and watch this thing for several minutes of just spinning, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click install again as quickly as I can between the two. So install and install, right? So these are both in progress now, you can see. And so we're just watching, there we go, start.txt. So this one on the right began first, and so it's installing the update. And so what I'm going to do is just pause the video right now, and as soon as the end.txt comes in, I will start it back up. Okay, just resuming the video while it's still installing, you see that the blue button has gone to gray over here, which means we're getting close to the completion of the install. So I'll put it right back on pause and come back when end.txt shows. All right, and end.txt just showed up. You see on the left-hand side that the window is still empty. Any moment now, we should see start.txt show up over there, meaning the second system is beginning to go. And you can also see that we're still spinning over here in an install state. So we're just waiting for this system to receive the approval to go forward. So again, should happen within moments. You'll see there it is. Start.txt is in there, so the install is running and we're good to go, right? So I'm going to pull these systems out of the way because I want to look at the logs, the relevant log from the system side by side. I'm going to use my site server to do that so I can put them on top of one another. All right, so I'm just going to go in here, look at the first one. Actually, I'll do -2 because it was the first one. So 7-2, sorry. There we go, already in memory there. Well, I'm having a terrible time. Let me try it again. There. Okay, apologize for my bad typing. Let's do this one more time. There, that's what I want here. All right, so I'm going to go, this is my, my logs directory. I'm going to go to the updates deployment log, open it up, and move it to the top. And then I'm going to go to lab server 1, which is the one that is probably still in progress, and look at it. All right, and let's do the updates deployment log here as well. Open this up. And I'm going to try to position these on top of one another, get rid of the reading pane there. Okay, good. And spread this out a little bit to cover the screen. Good enough. All right, and then this one, position it as well, cover the screen. All right, so what we have, let's start at the top, right? We're looking by time. Time is always our friend, or we can look for updates initiated by user. That's good too. So we'll just kind of scroll that one to the top of the screen. There we go. Right, and so this is the first one that hit. It's actually the second one in line that I started, but it was the first one to process and get the lock. So we're going through, we are initiating the software updates. We're getting the lock state. We've got a lock state of 1. I'll explain to you what the numbers mean in a minute. And we get a flag. Okay, hey, we're ready to go. We're available to run the update. So we proceed. PowerShell script, PowerShell path runs, running the PowerShell command line. Off we go, right? And then you can see where we actually put it, Windows temp, CCM, whatever. We're executing the PowerShell, get a completion, we're good to go. And then finally, we're applying the update, work. Here, we don't have a reboot that's needed. That's good. No other installs to complete. That's good. Now we're going to go ahead and run the node resume script, right? So notice that the reboot check was done prior to doing the node resume script. So we should be good to go there. And finally, we're done, right? We send a script state message of 612. I'll explain to you what that means here in a minute, right? So all of that was done very quickly, starting with initiate. You can trace it through. You see how quickly it happened. Well, let's look at this one. So we're going to go the same place, initiated by user. You can see now several iterations of what we're trying to do. Available to run, but it never runs, right? It's checking for update, checking for update, checking for update. Lock state in this case is 2. Finally, we get the clearance to go ahead and run down about right here. Okay, great. We're going to go ahead and proceed. PowerShell, it's all the same at this stage. Off we go. Finish that out. No reboot required, and we're good, right? So that's why, again, as a reminder, I said in my server group that only one of the clients in the group could run at the time. The first one started off, immediately got the approval to go forward, and the other one waited, and it waited, and it waited, and it waited until the first one was done, released its lock. The second one was able to get the lock and finally apply the update, right? So now these logs are set with just standard logging, right? If you were to enable verbose and debug logging, you would see a little bit more. In fact, let me go ahead and do that because I'm going to run another instance of that. Let me go do that on my my lab server here, Windows 7. So you'll see me set it. All right, so local machine, software, Microsoft, CCM, logging, at global, log level, set to 0. And then debug logging, registry key is what I need. New key. Good enough. So we'll actually run another software update here in just a minute. And that's all set now. So we'll be able to see a little bit of the difference in the log level. All right, good enough. We'll come back to that. Okay, so the question then might be, okay, well, I understand. So we have the client going out and requesting permission to go ahead and install the update. And at first it gets delayed, at least the second one does. Eventually we'll get clearance and go forward. Well, who are we asking? How are we asking to get the lock? Great question. So according to the diagram that I showed you a little bit ago, the client will actually ask the management point for clearance. And so the component that is being talked to on the management point, if I were to guess, I would think it would be the state messaging system, just based on some other things that happen. But I would be wrong. It is not the state messaging system. Let's go in to state messaging system is involved here, but it's not involved at this stage. So let's go in here. All right, go into logs. And under MP underscore, we have the MP underscore client ID. And this is the component that is involved. And so what happens is the client actually sends up their ID value, which is their GUID, and asks, hey, is this client, this GUID, good to go to proceed with applying this update? That information is sent to the client ID manager, and it will run a stored procedure and pass back the request information or the answer to the client. So receive client request body, you can see that it's actually asking. This is a client lock request. And you see the information here along. Here's the GUID. So it's asking, and then sending a reply message to the client to say yes or no, right? Pretty easy to follow. Now, we don't see the details here. We don't see the stored procedure running, but I'll show that to you here in just a minute, at least some of that detail, right? So that's the process that happens on the client in order to get the get everything set up. Now, before we complete this, there's a little bit more information in terms of monitoring this thing. So one of the things that I didn't show you, just because I was waiting and monitoring, didn't want to switch back and forth here, but it is available. So if you go into and show the members of your server group, there is a column here now called remote lock state, right? And it will tell you some detail about how things are progressing on the client and if it's waiting for a lock or that kind of thing, right? There's also the ability on a collection. So I've not seen it happen. I've heard of it happening rarely, right? Until a client is able to receive notification that it is clear to proceed from the database, that a lock is available, it will sit in that pending cycle, like you saw, right? There could conceivably be a scenario where, because of conditions on the network or whatever, that a lock just doesn't clear like it should. Well, if you have 10% of your server group updating at the same time, at least a number of the locks should clear, so you should proceed, even though you might not have all the locks totally cleared. Wouldn't be necessarily a bottleneck, but if you're doing what I'm doing and only one at a time, that could kind of get in the way and block the whole process. So there is a pretty easy ability to go down and clear server group deployment locks. Oops, that's because I chose a collection that was not configured as a server group. So just clear the locks, goes to the database, make sure that all the locks that are in place are freed up, and then your patching can proceed as you would maybe want it to, right? All right, so that's one thing. Now, the other thing I've kind of alluded to a couple of times is the fact that, yes, this approach that I've showed you, the whole idea of server groups, it is totally tied to just software updates. But I put an asterisk there. Why? Because what can we deliver with software updates? Certainly anything under this node, but it's not just this node. It's anything that would be going through the software update channel, which would include Windows 10 servicing, which would include O365 client management stuff, right? That's why on my client, you saw me have Office 365 available. In fact, let's pull that client back in, right? Here we go. So let's go back to updates, and we still see our Office 365 client update here. I'm going to pull up the log simultaneously. I'm not going to keep this there because you've already seen that process. Let's just go back here, Windows, CCM logs, and I'm going to pull up the updates deployment log just so we can watch this. Now, the other thing I want to show you, I've turned on verbose and debug logging, so we'll see what happens with that as well. So here's this. I'm going to go ahead and click install. Now, the first thing you're going to see in the logs, it's going to go ask for lock states, right? The fact it's proceeding the same way, and here's the request body going up to our management point to ask for locks, right? Available to run. The whole fact that it's asking means it's using the software updates channel and trying to process the same way, so it's able to use the server groups, right? Now, we're waiting for this. You see this extra information that was not here in the previous level of logging. So it doesn't add a ton, but it does add this additional detail to be able to see what's going on, right? Okay, so just wanted to show you that. I'll go ahead and pull this out of the way, and we are in the process of applying an Office 365 update, right? Okay, all right, so let me pull this part of the lab out as well, right? We'll come back to that in a minute. So all of that, we see kind of end to end, how it works. Well, let's dive a little bit deeper, right? So there is that piece at the management point that goes and checks the state of locks on the client request, whether we can get a lock and so on. There's a number of things that actually happen here. I'm not going to cover but two of them really, just kind of for educational purposes. Let me go ahead and pull the lab back in. Now, what I'm about to show you is SQL, and it's always a little bit interesting because we don't want you touching the SQL database, but it's educational to understand how things work. So this is kind of a look, don't touch kind of thing, right? But let's launch SQL, and let's go see what it looks like for how we retrieve the status, the current locking status of the system, of a system, right? So let's go down to the ConfigMgr database. Here we are. Run a new query. The first thing, since the lab server 7-1 is in progress, I'll use it. I need to figure out the client GUID. So select star from system underscore disk where name 0 equal lab serve 7-1. All right, and execute that. Okay, so that's the GUID. So I'm going to copy that to my clipboard and then run another query. Select star from deployment. Sorry, that's the wrong one. Jumping ahead. Exec sp get lock state in, and then paste the GUID. Actually, that is not the one I wanted. I must have pasted or copied the wrong one. Here is what I want. There, let's copy this one. Paste, and then close the quote. Execute that. And I get back a value of 2, right? So what this means is that there's actually 4 possible values for the lock state. There's 0, which means neutral, don't know anything, right, about it right now. There's a status of 1. You saw 1 in one of the logs that we looked at that says, hey, I'm trying to acquire a lock. I don't have a lock right now. I need one, trying to get one, state of 1. There's 2, which is what you see here, saying, okay, I'm releasing the lock. I've successfully installed the update I need, or updates that I need to install. I'm releasing it. Someone else can take it and proceed. State of 2 means releasing lock. State of 3 is script failure, right? I've failed running the script. That's my current state. And so we're reflecting that back. And those are the 4 possible values for the lock state. There's another thing that you can also look at to kind of collectively look at what's going on with the deployment. Deployment mutex, okay? And run that one. And so in this case, I just have one system showing up in the list still, but it shows you the deployment state, the resource ID, the GUID, timestamp, and so on, right? So it's just kind of a collective way to look at systems that are being targeted and so forth, right? Okay, so that's kind of end-to-end how it works, how the management point kind of communicates to the database. There's more things in there that happen, and it depends too on the configuration of your server group, but maybe to give you an idea, what's going on. Then there are also pieces of the process where we will reflect back the state of processing, right? So without getting too far off in the weeds here, let me pull this log back in. You'll see a couple of places where we're sending the script state message of 611, right? Or some other state message of whatever. Oh, this one finally timed out. But either way, you see the processing. You see the state message detail, 611. There's actually 3 different types of state message you would get. A 611 means trying to acquire a deployment mutex. 612, releasing the deployment mutex. 613, deployment script failed. So those kind of line up with the state IDs. State ID of 1 is acquiring. State message 611 is acquiring. State of 2 is releasing, successful. State ID of 612, topic type, is releasing. And then we have a script error for state of 3, and then also for state message 613, deployment script failed, right? There's a number of different things that we could do in SQL. One thing I don't have my lab set up for, the setting the specific order of operations. There's actually tables we can see priority of what's supposed to happen when, and know whether things are running correctly, but that's really diving pretty deep, and typically you'd be working with support anyway whenever you're working through those things, right? So that's getting pretty much as deep as I want to go for server groups. So as we start to look toward wrapping up the discussion here, just a few tips and tricks. Some of these we've already mentioned. The ability to release all locks, right? The right-click option. If things look like they're stuck or questionable, or you just want to make sure, or proactively clean the locks out of, after deployment, whatever, right? Right-click, release all locks, and you should be good to go. Deployments and server groups, right? So this is one that I'll ask you first and then answer. So the question is, does your deployment for your software update need to be deployed to the collection where the server group membership is defined in order for the server group piece to function, right? The answer to that is no, right? And it's kind of like the way we use collections to define maintenance windows or power policy, right? Same kind of thing. Our guidance in those cases is that you, in fact, build collections that define your maintenance window, that define your power settings. And in the same way, recommendation, build a server group collection that defines your server group, and that's it. Don't target deployments against it. That way, if you have a server group that contains 100 systems, for example, but you have a collection that you're deploying to that contains 1,000, 900 that are not part of any server group, and the other 100 that are, you can just operate the normal way. The ones that are part of server groups are going to know that because they've inherited that policy from the collection that defines the server group, if that makes sense, right? All right, server group membership. All computers in the collection that defines a server group need to be from the same site, right? Just a requirement. There's some technical reasons for it, but just know that's a requirement as you're setting things up. The node, drain, and the resume scripts, we've talked about it, are not strictly a requirement. Also, the question mark only software update deployments, again, absolutely true, but within the software update deployment set, you can also do Office 365 and other things, Windows 10 deployment, so on, right? So anything that uses the software updates channel, which would also include custom updates through Skype, right? You can use that way as well. So that wraps up what I wanted to share with you about server groups. It's a really cool feature. It is still in pre-release. Expect maybe some changes going forward from this recording, but this gives you a sense of how it works, how it could be useful. Take a look at it. Really kind of cool.